Welcome to the second part of this sectarian derby, and today we're in the green side of Glasgow to talk about the nation's second favourite green hoops behind cheese and onion hula hoops, Celtic, and their ground of Celtic Park. We're heading back to the 1880s when Celtic FC were formed and were playing their games at the original Celtic Park in the Parkhead area of Glasgow, with their first game being against Rangers on the 28th of May 1888, with Celtic winning 5-2. It was in 1892, however, when Celtic were forced to leave the original Celtic Park as the rent increased ninefold and were looking to build a new stadium, when the club found a site 200 yards down the road at a disused brickyard. The new Celtic Park opened on the 20th of August 1892, with a journalist stating that the move was like leaving a graveyard and entering paradise, and from this, the ground's nickname of Paradise would be born. The new stadium would be an elongated oval shape similar to Hampden Park, consisting of terracing which could hold 40,000 spectators, as well as running and cycling tracks. On the northern side of the ground was a pavilion and seated stand. The ground at the time of opening was described as the best ground in Britain, only to be rivalled by Goodison Park. It was in 1894 when Celtic would be the first club in Britain to install a press box, and subsequently would build an enclosed window stand with padded seats for the prawn sandwich brigade. However, as you can imagine, watching Celtic on a cold wet Tuesday night meant that the glass would steam up, but was probably still better than watching Manchester United.
He is so shit.
Over the next few decades, the stadium would be subjected to multiple fires, in which most of the original stadium would be lost. The results of this saw Celtic constructing a new single-tiered main stand, which surprisingly wasn't designed by our Scottish lad Archibald Leach, but by a folk called Duncan and Kerr. The stand would be smaller in scale and less ornate than its Ibrox counterpart, and was completed in the summer of 1929. Despite being only the third biggest ground in Glasgow, it was certainly bigger than any other ground in England, with its record attendance of 83,000 being on New Year's Day 1939 for an Old Firm game. The ground would be significantly improved during the reign of Jock Stein, with the most notable additions being adding roofs on the stadium to become the nation's most covered ground outside of Wembley, and the improvement of the Hayshed Terrace, nicknamed the Jungle, in 1966. Moving into the 80s, and in 1988, it was goodbye to the original red brick facade on the main stand, with the stand being updated to include lounges and offices. Unlike their blue counterparts, whose stadium evolved over the decades to being a predominantly seated stadium, Celtic Park was still very much a standing ground, which meant Celtic were badly placed with the arrival of the Taylor Report in the 1990s, which required grounds to be all-seater stadiums. In response to the Taylor Report, the club would propose to build a new stadium on an industrial site in Cambuslang, 3 miles away from Celtic Park. In the meantime, the club would upgrade the Jungle to a seater stand, much to the dismay of much of the fans. However, during the 1990s, Celtic were not in the best place financially, and with the threat of bankruptcy looming, the club was bought by a Scottish-Canadian businessman called Fergus McCann. With the arrival of McCann, the proposals for the new stadium were quickly discarded, opting to bring Celtic Park in line with the Taylor Report. This included a complete overhaul of the stadium, with much of the existing ground being demolished and was to be built in 3 phases. One of the most notable design quirks being the North Stand that holds a whopping 27,000 fans is squeezed in between the pitch and the Eastern Necropolis Cemetery, which sees the stadium overhanging the cemetery, much to the dismay of some local residents. At the end of the upgrade, the stadium would have a capacity of over 60,000, which made Celtic Park the biggest club ground in the country at the time. Moving into the 21st century, the stadium has remained unaltered since its makeover in the 90s. However, there have been plans in the pipeline to increase the ground's capacity, allowing more fans to pack out the stadium when the boys get knocked out to some Lithuanian second division team in Europe.
Yeah, it was a masterclass, wasn't it?